For 3 years, everyone who mattered in Halifax believed Odessa Kaine had lost her mind. Her stepfather Raymond Corbin had made sure of that. The story he told was clean and sympathetic. A brilliant young musician destroyed by grief after losing her mother, too fragile for the real world, better off somewhere quiet and supervised. He told it at charity dinners. He told it to journalists who asked about his stepdaughter. He said it with such measured, heartbroken dignity that people squeezed his arm and called him a saint. Odessa heard every word of it through the walls. She was 24 years old, and she was not broken. She sat in the east wing bedroom of Raymond's Lunenburg estate, a converted century-old sea captain's home that the architectural magazines called hauntingly beautiful. And she listened. That was what she did. She listened and she remembered. Every conversation that filtered through the plaster, every phone call Raymond took in his study 1 room over, every number and name and instruction he muttered. When he believed she was sedated into silence by the white pills his private physician left on her breakfast tray. Odessa had been palming those pills for 8 months and disposing of them in the bathroom drain. She was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. What Raymond had never understood about his stepdaughter, what no one had ever understood, including her mother, was that Odessa's mind was not like other minds. She had been 4 years old when she realized she could replay sounds the way other children replayed memories. Not just remember them, replay them. Exact pitch, exact cadence, every hesitation and breath and background noise preserved in perfect fidelity. Her music teachers called it a gift. Raymond Corbin had called it a liability. He discovered what she knew 6 weeks after her mother's funeral. Odessa's mother, Margaret Kaine, had died of what the death certificate called a cardiac event. It was, in Raymond's telling, terribly sudden. He was devastated. The will had been filed within 10 days, a document that redirected Margaret's considerable personal estate, including the Lunenburg property and a portfolio of royalty rights, entirely to Raymond. A document that bore Margaret's signature. Odessa had been in the hallway outside her mother's study when Raymond dictated the terms of that will to his private solicitor 3 days before Margaret died. She had heard everything. She had committed it to memory the way she committed every sound, without effort, without intention, permanently. When she made the mistake of telling Raymond what she remembered, he had her committed to Hillcroft private care within 48 hours. Grief psychosis, he explained gently to the intake physician. Delusions. She's been saying things, confusing things. I worry she may be a danger to herself. She spent 16 months at Hillcroft. When Raymond brought her home, it was not out of kindness. His business associates had begun asking about her, and it was tidier, he said to the estate manager, to have her where he could see her. He did not see her the way she saw him. By the 2nd year back at the Lunenburg estate, Odessa had constructed an architecture of knowledge that would have taken a financial crimes investigator months to assemble. Raymond Corbin's music label, Harrogate Sound, was legitimate on paper, a mid-sized Atlantic Canadian operation that managed 6 recording artists and held rights to a respectable catalogue of folk and contemporary recordings. In practice, Harrogate Sound was a financial corridor. Money moved in from sources Raymond never named clearly, not even on the phone, but Odessa had cross-referenced enough fragments to understand the shape of it. The label was being used to clean income, tour revenue that didn't exist. Licensing fees from shell companies in Belize and Malta. Raymond hadn't created this system. He had inherited it from the organization that approached him 12 years ago with an offer too lucrative to refuse. She knew the name of that organization because Raymond had said it aloud, carelessly, once in the middle of an argument with someone on the phone. She had never forgotten it. She had never forgotten anything. Tonight, the gravel of the front drive crunched differently than it usually did. Odessa sat at the edge of her bed and listened to the particular pattern of it. Heavier vehicles, more of them, the engineered hush of expensive SUVs rather than Raymond's British saloon. She crossed to the window and stood back from the glass watching. 4 black vehicles had pulled into the circular drive. The men who stepped out moved with a particular quality of stillness that Odessa recognized from the rare occasions when Raymond's most important visitors arrived, not the politicians he entertained or the radio executives he cultivated. The other kind. The man who emerged from the rear vehicle last was tall and unhurried. He was perhaps 35, wearing a grey coat that fell to his knees, and he paused for a moment in the cold November air and looked at the house the way a person looks at something they are deciding whether to acquire or demolish. Raymond was on the front steps to meet him with a deference Odessa had never seen from her stepfather toward anyone. She pressed her ear to the plaster of the east wall. Downstairs, the conversation began. Raymond had set up the study for this meeting, the good Scotch out, the fire lit, the estate manager sent home early. He was performing ease. Odessa could hear it in the rhythm of his voice, hosting, deflecting. The other man barely spoke for the first 20 minutes. When he did, his voice was low and even, accented in a way that placed him somewhere east of Austria and west of the Caucasus. Ukrainian, Odessa thought, based on the cadence. She had listened to enough recordings to know. His name, she learned from Raymond's repeated and slightly too eager use of it, was Mr. Koval, Taras Koval. And he was not happy. "The accounts are short," Koval said at one point. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Raymond's reply was a wall of explanation, market conditions, processing delays, a currency conversion issue his accountant was correcting. Koval said nothing in response. The silence stretched long enough that Raymond started talking again, filling it with more words that amounted to nothing. Odessa closed her eyes and concentrated. In 6 months of listening through this wall, she had assembled a complete picture of Raymond's secondary ledger, the one that existed only in conversation, never written, never filed. She knew the name of the Belize holding company. She knew the account number at a private bank in Luxembourg that Raymond had recited twice while confirming a wire. She knew the dates, the amounts, and, most importantly, she knew what Raymond had done with the discrepancy that Koval was now, in his quiet way, asking about. He had skimmed it. Carefully, over 18 months, redirecting fractions of the incoming flows into a personal account he held under a numbered company in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were small enough individually to avoid triggering attention. In aggregate, they represented just over $2 million. Odessa had done the arithmetic months ago, sitting on the floor of this room with a pencil and the back of a grocery receipt Raymond's housekeeper had thrown in the recycling. She heard a chair scrape footsteps. Then Koval's voice, no longer in the study, moving through the corridor below. Odessa straightened. She had thought about this moment, imagined various versions of it for a long time. She had no illusions about what Taras Koval was or what he was capable of. A man who arrived at night with 4 vehicles and 4 quiet men and made Raymond Corbin sweat through his shirt was not a man who operated within the boundaries of anything she would call safe. But Odessa had spent 3 years surrounded by unsafe. She had grown fluent in it. She had something Koval needed. The question was whether she could get him to the same conclusion before he decided she was a complication. She heard his footsteps pause in the foyer. Then, instead of returning to the study, they moved toward the east wing staircase. She had maybe 30 seconds. Odessa moved to the center of the room, smoothed her grey knit sweater, and faced the door. The door opened without a knock. Taras Koval filled the doorframe in a way that was less about his physical size, though he was large, broad through the shoulder, with the kind of stillness that comes from never having needed to raise his voice, and more about what he carried with him, a quality of absolute certainty. He looked at everything in the room in one sweep, and then looked at her. He had dark eyes, grey at the edges, and they were not unkind. They were, however, entirely without warmth. He was reading her the way you read a document, for what it contained, not what it felt. "Who are you?" he asked. "Odessa Kaine." She kept her voice flat. She had practiced this. "Raymond's stepdaughter." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Recalculation. Raymond Corbin's stepdaughter had a breakdown. She's been in care. Raymond Corbin's stepdaughter became inconvenient, Odessa said. There's a difference. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him without taking his eyes from her face. Why are you telling me this? Because you came here to find out where $2 million went, she said, and I can tell you exactly where it is, what account it's sitting in, and what documentation Raymond used to move it there. Routing numbers, transfer dates, the name of the numbered company, all of it. Koval said nothing. His face gave nothing. He thinks you won't find it, Odessa continued, because he structured the transfers to look like label operating costs. Licensing fees to a shell called Briar Sound Consulting, registered in the Caymans. 7 transfers between April of last year and last month. Largest single amount was $412,000. The account number begins with 0073. She paused. Would you like the rest of it? The silence in the room was different from the silences she was used to. This one felt inhabited. How do you know this? Koval asked. Odessa glanced toward the east wall. I've been in this room for 2 years. The study is on the other side of that wall. He looked at the wall. He looked back at her. You remembered it, he said, not a question. I remember everything I hear. She said it without drama. Every conversation Raymond has had in that study since I came back here, I can reproduce it verbatim. Names, numbers, dates. I have all of it. For the first time, something changed in Taras Koval's face. Not warmth, not pity. Something she didn't quite have a word for. Focused attention, maybe. The way a man looks when he has walked into a room expecting one thing and found something he hadn't anticipated. And what do you want for it? He asked. Odessa had thought carefully about how to say this part. She had rehearsed various versions in the small hours of the morning when the house was quiet, and she lay awake running through contingencies. In the end, she kept it simple. I want out of this house, she said. I want Raymond to have nothing left, and I want him to know it was me. Koval studied her for a long moment. Then he said, walk me through the transfers. She did. All 7. Dates, amounts, account designations, the name of the solicitor Raymond had used to establish the Cayman Company. She delivered it in order without notes, without hesitation, her voice steady and precise. When she finished, the room was very quiet. The solicitor's name, Koval said. Brennan and Associates, Halifax. Raymond used a junior associate. He went to Dalhousie with Raymond in the 90s. Raymond called him Dale on the phone. Raymond called everyone by their first name when he wanted something. Koval looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly something she didn't catch. Ukrainian, possibly, and crossed to the door. He stopped. Get your coat, he said. You're coming downstairs. The dining room of the Lunenburg estate was exactly as Raymond had always maintained it. Tasteful and expensive, the wide plank floors original to the house, the long harvest table set for a working dinner that no one had eaten. Raymond was standing when they came in. He had positioned himself near the fireplace, which was the posture of a man trying to look at ease and failing completely. He saw Koval first. Then he saw who was walking behind him, and the color left his face so completely and so fast that it was almost interesting to watch. Raymond, Koval said pleasantly, crossing to the head of the table and pulling out a chair for Odessa's as though they were attending a perfectly ordinary meeting. I believe you know your daughter. She's, Raymond's voice cracked. He reset. She's not well. She has a condition, her doctors will tell you. She has episodes where she becomes confused. She says things that aren't. Brennan and Associates, Odessa said. Dale Brennan. He incorporated Briar Sound Consulting in Grand Cayman on the 14th of February of last year. Valentine's Day. You made a joke about it on the phone. You said, love is a tax shelter. She looked at Raymond steadily across the length of the harvest table. Account number beginning with 073. First transfer, April 7th, $236,000. You called it a licensing fee for archival recordings from an artist who hasn't recorded in 11 years and doesn't know the company exists. Raymond's jaw worked. She's lying. You used the same seed phrase for the account authentication that you used for the label's primary banking portal, Odessa continued. You changed it last March, but you said the new one allowed when you were setting it up on the phone. You said each character slowly so your assistant could type it. She paused. M, capital M. Then ARGARET. Then 1966. She watched his face. My mother's name. Her birth year. You laundered your stolen money behind my dead mother's name. The room was entirely silent. Koval settled into a chair at the head of the table with the unhurried ease of a man watching something he had arranged in advance. His two men remained near the entrance. No one moved. Raymond Corbin looked at his stepdaughter across the harvest table. This quiet, supposedly unstable girl he had erased from the world, and something crumpled in his face. Not remorse. She hadn't expected remorse. Just the particular horror of a man who had believed a door was locked, finding it standing open. You can't prove any of this, he said. His voice had gone very small. You have no documentation. You were committed. Your word against mine means nothing. My word, Odessa said, and Mr. Koval's. She looked at Koval. Koval looked at Raymond with the mild, impersonal contempt of a man reviewing an invoice that has come back incorrect for the third time. Written documentation has a way of appearing when motivated people look for it, he said, especially when someone provides them with exact routing numbers and the name of the solicitor involved. He paused. I came here thinking you were merely incompetent, Raymond. I see now that you are also a thief. Those are different problems requiring different solutions. Raymond lunged for the door. One of Koval's men had him by the arm before he crossed 2 meters. It was efficient and quiet, and Raymond made a sound that did not suit a man of his social standing at all. He was guided back to his chair. He sat. The account, Koval said to Odessa, as though Raymond hadn't moved. Can you direct a transfer? The seed phrase is my mother's name and birth year, Odessa said. The security question is the name of his first signed recording artist. That's Callaway Folk. And yes, that's the full band name, not the lead singer, because Raymond has always cared more about the brand than the people in it. I've heard him answer that question twice. She sat down in front of Raymond's laptop, which had been open on the table throughout the dinner nobody had touched. Her fingers found the keys without hesitation. Koval kept his eyes on Raymond. 2,314,000, Odessa said, reading from the screen. Plus accumulated interest. She looked up. Where would you like it? Koval gave her a routing number from memory. She entered it without comment. Initiating transfer, she said. Raymond made a sound. Don't, Koval said, without heat, without even looking at him. Raymond did not. The screen blinked. Odessa watched the confirmation populate. Done, she said. She did not close the laptop. She opened a second tab. Raymond was watching her now with the expression of a man who had realized too late that the thing he spent years treating as helpless was the most dangerous thing in the house. There's one more account, Odessa said. The one Raymond has been building for himself for 4 years, independent of the Briar Sound transfers. A personal reserve. A second numbered company in Malta. She looked at Raymond directly. You called it your retirement plan, on the phone, out loud, while I was in the next room. Raymond's voice came out, stripped of everything he'd carefully built. Odessa. Don't, she said. It was the first time she had let anything personal enter her voice. Don't say my name like we're family. You told a physician I was delusional. You told people who loved my mother that she would have wanted this for me. She looked back at the screen. You used her name as your password. She entered the sequence. The Malta account opened. $840,000. That one, Odessa said, is mine. Consider it back wages for 3 years of involuntary confinement. She completed the transfer to an account she had quietly opened 6 months ago online, using her original SIN number and the one piece of government ID Raymond had never thought to confiscate, her library card used to verify her identity at a digital banking portal on Raymond's own laptop while he was out of the house one afternoon. She closed the laptop. The room was so quiet she could hear the fire shifting in the grate. One of Koval's men let out a breath that might, in a different room, have been a laugh. Raymond sat at the head of his harvest table in his heritage property, with his hands flat on the wood, and looked at the ruin of the evening with hollow eyes. The philanthropy and the grief and the measured dignity were gone. What was left was just a man in an expensive shirt who had done ugly things and believed, for a very long time, that ugliness was the same as power. Koval stood. He straightened his coat. He looked at Odessa with an expression she could not have named precisely. It was not pity, and it was not admiration exactly, and it was not the way men who hold all the power in a room usually look at women who appear to hold none of it. It was closer to recognition. The way you look at something that turned out to be entirely different from what you were told. "Your memory is exact," he asked, "not about the money." She understood that. He was asking something else. "Yes," she said. "Every conversation. Every conversation." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, Raymond Corbin is going to have a complicated few months. Financial crimes. Probate fraud. The will you mentioned. Authorities find these things when they receive specific and accurate information from credible sources." He looked at Raymond without expression. "I'll see that they receive it." Raymond had nothing left to say. He sat with his hands flat on the table and said nothing. Koval held the dining room door open. Odessa stood. She picked up nothing. There was nothing in this house she wanted. She walked past the table and past the fire and past the architectural details that the magazines had photographed, and the community service awards Raymond had collected for his generosity to the Halifax art scene. She did not look at any of it. She stopped in the doorway. She turned back. "The password was my mother's name," she said to Raymond for the last time. "You couldn't even be bothered to be original about it." She walked through the door. The November air off the Atlantic hit her face like a hand pressed open, cold and salt and entirely without restraint. Odessa stood on the front step of the Lunenburg estate and breathed it in, the kind of breathing that has nothing to do with oxygen and everything to do with what a person has been waiting to exhale. She had not been outside after dark in 14 months. Koval came to stand beside her. His men were already moving toward the vehicles. "Where will you go?" he asked. Odessa looked out at the harbor, the lights of the town reflected across the black water. She had an account with $840,000 in it. She had a memory that held 3 years of recorded conversations that any competent financial crimes investigator would find extremely useful. She had 12 hours, approximately, before Raymond would attempt to make any of this her problem again. She felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that was not quite happiness and not quite peace, but was the necessary precondition of both. "East," she said. "I have an aunt in Cape Breton. She always thought I was sane." Koval was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you ever want to put that memory to work, legitimately or otherwise, there are people who would find it valuable." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I've been listening to you for the past 2 hours." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more restrained and perhaps more genuine. He walked to the lead vehicle. One of his men opened the rear door. Before he got in, Koval looked back at her, standing on the step of the house that had swallowed 3 years of her life. "The way Raymond told it," he said, "you were lost." "Raymond was wrong about a lot of things," Odessa said. Koval nodded once as though she had confirmed something he had already decided. He got in, the door closed. Odessa watched the 4 black SUVs roll down the gravel drive and out through the iron gates. The taillights disappeared into the November dark. She stood alone on the step and looked at the harbor and thought about her mother, and thought about Cape Breton, and thought about how 3 years of enforced silence had made her into something Raymond had never thought to fear, something he could not have stopped even if he had tried. He had spent 3 years believing she was lost. She had spent 3 years making sure that when she was found, She would be the one doing the finding. She stepped off the front step. The gravel crunched under her feet, her direction. She did not look back.